Hello, this video I want to do a little bit into, well, ancient knowledge, ancient tech, and how it connects to Otzi the Iceman. Now, I've pixelated it because even previous videos have got, what do they call it, limited state or something like that, because I had pictures of Egyptian mummies from the museum and even coffins, even at a video where I just had a picture of a funeral in place, got sort of marked down. But so that's pixelated, but Otzi the Iceman, September 1991 was at the time was a bit of a big deal at the time, because what happened was that these hikers in the Alps found this body. It was assumed it was a murder victim because it was still very well preserved, but actually found out that it was a 5,002-year-old body, and in the site they found his tools, his belongings, and his items, and it shows very interesting stuff. So his belongings tell us about how he lived and what he knew, but his tools especially are very interesting. So they found he was making a new bow, which was from yew, so just like the famous Welsh and English longbow. Now I'm not sure if it was this part of a heartwood, because then you have the reflex and the deflex match, which is one of the reasons why the longbow is such a special weapon or hunting tool as well, and his quiver as well. But it shows that he had and this was not so long ago. So now city folk, we've sort of lost our knowledge of the land. But only a generation or two ago, people who grew up in the countryside had an understanding of the different properties of different plants, different woods, for instance, and each of his items had a special selection of the wood that he. So, for instance, the lime tree was the handle of his flint knife. He didn't use the same wood for everything. They chose special wood, and so it's why, like if you're a shipbuilder, you don't just grab any old wood. If you're an instrument maker, the famous Stradivarius, not only that you would choose special timber, but also age it in a certain way. Again, part of this older knowledge, we're losing it now. This pencil-looking thing is actually a fire-hardened deer antler, and he used this as a flint knap, so he would break off the flint. So you can so these flint knives, razor sharp, and he can just flick off the end. All across the world, Stone Age, people are very skilled at shaping these. It's you can't just. It's not an easy thing to do. It required skill and knowledge even to shape these types of arrowheads, spearheads, knives, and daggers. Medicines were found there, so he was found to have Lyme disease, but whipworm eggs were in his digestional tract, and the acid in birch fungus would actually be an effective treatment. If that was for, well, we're not really sure. The tattoos across his body, some suggest, because of their location, that's almost like where modern acupuncturists would treat, chronic back pain, these type of issues, and they seem to match up. But again, we're not really sure. They could be some sort of, it's up in the air. But he was tattooed. His backpack, his shoes, his coat show, again, very simple. You would think, but to try actually to tie a knot and a mesh to make a shoe from twine, and his rope as well. Because we just buy them off the shelf, we take them for granted, but not tying technology is ancient and very, very important. And if you know how to tie different types of knots, you can do things that we assume impossible, as they say. But the really important feature is his copper axe. Now, the handle of the axe was yew. Again, chose a certain type of timber that is best for that application. But the axe is 99.7% pure copper, which was pretty interesting. How did they get that purity? But no, the actual important part of this copper axe is the impurity of it. And what is the other 0.3%? They've done an analysis of it, and what do we have? We have, well, basically off the scale in comparison to everything else is arsenic. And that is a very important feature, because the impurities in copper change copper into essentially bronze, but arsenic was in there, and that it was in there is very important. Now, whether it was in there intentionally, whether they added it, or whether it was naturally occurring, doesn't really matter, because people would have seen that the copper from this area is not very good, as opposed to copper from this area, which, if they knew it or not, had arsenic in it, and made it arsenical copper, which is very different. So his axe wasn't a copper axe, it was actually an arsenical copper axe, and that makes a big difference. when most people, and I'll show you even just not just in the alternative, even in the supposed mainstream of history, when they talk about copper, they're actually really, really badly missing the point. Very important issue. So when they all think about copper, we think of the copper in electrical wire, pure copper. It's essentially 100% but 99.9% pure. It's, like when they stamp gold, it's 99.999%. It's very hard to get rid of all the impurities. But this type of copper, or the copper piping for water pipes, which is 99.9 or above percent, this is pure copper. And when we're used to dealing with it, we know how malleable it is, all these things. But this is not arsenical copper. This is not the copper used by ancient people. It's actually not the copper used by people until a very short time ago. Where this is a copper we know, but it's not the copper of history. So bronze is just a copper alloy. So usually it's with tin, antimony, and bismuth, which appears in the impurities, but it's so low that's not really significant. If you have more than 1% of the weight in your bronze, that's considered copper. That's considered arsenical bronze, and if it's above 1%, it's a sure sign that the arsenic was added intentionally. Therefore, they had high levels of metallurgy. However, arsenical copper or bronze, firstly, both arsenical bronze or just arsenical copper, it's an important distinction from just bronze or copper, very important. And even if it was accidental arsenical copper, so Otzi or the people mining it might not have known about that aspect of it but they knew that the copper from certain mines was much different, essentially two different metals in essence, as opposed to copper from other mines. Pure copper, for the stuff that we're used to, this is good for not corroding and for conductivity. And this is the copper we use today. We've lost the importance of arsenical copper. So if you were to add 0.5% of weight of arsenic to copper, it reduces the conductivity to 1/3 of pure copper. That's not good for electrical wiring. So that's why we want pure copper now. There's no interest in arsenical copper anymore. We'll have a look at that soon. It's almost all but forgotten, except for some small areas. But it's very, very important distinction to make. Pure copper, like copper wiring, or pipes, it's good for bending around corners. But that's what we think of, and that's what many, not just alternative, but also mainstream people just assume pure copper. Big mistake. Arsenical copper is an important one to know. So again, in the age of steam, they specified arsenical copper and bronze for the boilers and etc. because pure copper, it's not very good. Arsenical copper can tolerate, not only does it corrode, but it can tolerate all of the stresses that go with it. So steam boilers would specify arsenical copper back in the day. Now we have different metals and alloys, but it's a very, very important feature. Arsenical copper until recently was the standard copper. All apples are apples. Not all apples are the same. They all have different purposes and properties. Some good for cooking, some for eating, some for making preserves. And this applies with copper. They have different impurities, let's say, in there. It's these slight differences which make them actually very different. So they're all apples, but they're not all equal. And so this copper that we just, so often is used as a basis for copper working with stonework, well, that's copper wiring and copper piping that you're used to. It is not ancient copper or arsenical copper. Across in the Americas, but in Asia, or all across Asia through to Mesopotamia and Egypt, the artifacts which are just usually described as copper, if you actually look a little bit deeper, they're actually arsenical copper. Very, very important because it's a big difference. Soft copper, such in piping and wall wiring, will not make you a very good axe. A little bit of arsenic in there and a little bit of impurities will make it into a metal which is significantly different and different properties. Not all steel is the same. There's soft steel, there's hard steel, and same with copper. There are different variations of this metal. So the copper ore from the Sinai Peninsula is very rich in arsenic, naturally rich in arsenic, and the other minerals in there will actually basically make bronze. So what's usually just described as copper is arsenical copper or arsenical bronze, depending on but again, this is a very important feature. Now, It's not just in the Sinai, in places, for instance, in Peru. There are large copper mines there, but they are very high in arsenic, and they want to build a big plant to separate the arsenic out of the copper to sell it as copper pipe and copper wiring. And an interesting little thing is that there's a nice correlation between these stoneworking cultures and the presence of copper ores with naturally high arsenic. It's, it's a correlation is not causation, but it seems to, well, I haven't seen one where the presence of naturally high arsenic is not there. It appears in other places where are not stoneworking cultures, but where there are stoneworking cultures, arsenical copper and arsenical bronze, you can bet your bottom dollar on it. So Otzi's copper axe 99.7% pure is actually pointing at something significant. As was not for copper wiring. They were not interested in the conductivity. They wanted a good tool, which was good for cutting wood and for these as a weapon and just as a general all-round tool. And his copper axe is, compared to everything else, it's off the scales with arsenic. Whether it was natural or intentional doesn't matter. It's the presence of it in there that makes this copper special. This copper they believe it come from Tuscany, about 500 kilometers where he come from. So there was local copper. Why didn't he use that? He could have got it in it, but it's because certain centers, certain cities, cultures will actually gain wealth from trade because their copper was much more valued than others. And it turns out it's arsenical copper. So there's this site here now. This one is on the really far end of the fringe, and so not only do they claim you can't cut stone with steel or with copper, and they say steel literally as well. I'll put the links in the description. Let's go and have a look at their page. I'm not, again, they literally say, that steel cannot cut stone. Now, now this is on the far end because, well, that's just silly. Now, impossible. Now, that's one of the problems with this. We use the word proof, and we hear the word impossible a lot when it's actually unproven, dogmatic speculation, totally unfounded, or impossible is confused with the word possible and well-established, long-used principles. This is a big issue. Words count. You can't just make stuff up, and you can't just invent new definitions for words. This copper that they use is pure copper. It's not arsenical copper, and this is not just limited to the alternative. Well, it's actually a big issue amongst the establishment as well. So again, they claim steel can't cut stone. Well, all the sculptors and quarry workers out there, you've got a big problem. Apparently you're doing the impossible. Now, there's also, I'll put this link to this description in this site. It's a blacksmith. They were hired by National Geographic to make a series of copper chisels for a reconstruction. And again, in the interview, they used old copper piping, pure copper, to make these chisels. And the producers of this, actually specified that they want pure. So the link will be in a description. This is this blacksmith. This is pure copper. They specified they want pure copper to make this. Now it's somewhere in the text here. But yeah, they wanted pure copper, and now, of course, being a blacksmith, he's got some idea of what he's saying, and down towards the end he points out the fact that copper with impurities is actually stronger than pure copper. For some reason they wanted pure, and again, he used old copper, pure copper, to make these chisels, and that's historically inaccurate. So again, this is another, so National Geographic would be one example. Now, here's the elephant in the room, and this has gone around quite a bit. And well, this Mark Lehner and this attempt to reconstruct the Sphinx, if we actually deconstruct it as well as and not only critique his experiment reconstruction, let's call it, but also the critiques of them, because both of them are actually full of glaring omissions and really big holes and actually mistakes. And if anything, Mark Lehner comes out much worse in all of this. So we'll have a look at that now. Okay, so the link will be in the description to the full documentary. There are these cut up pieces going around which report to debunk this. Actually, well, there's some very big issues with this, but again, it's Mark Lehner who comes out of this the worst. However, the alleged debunkers of this are entirely missing the point and actually sort of everyone sort of seems to be not look very good at the end of this. So Mark Lehner had a team carve a smaller replica version of the Sphinx's nose, and it took them 2 weeks. Now, to speed up the process along the way, they used modern power tools. Now, what percentage of the work was done with modern power tools, whether it was 10% or 90%, I don't know. But that's it's not shown. Some report to say it was anyway. But please do watch the full documentary if you're genuinely interested, because there are some issues in regards to this, and this works actually both ways of the both the let's just unfortunate term mainstream versus alternative. But at the time code between 22 and 23 minutes, they specify the use of pure copper, and that's straight away. This is a big issue because pure copper was not used. The copper chisels that are survived from Egypt are not pure copper. They were arsenical copper. So that's number one, and this is a big strike against the establishment version of this, but it also, well, of the debunking as well, because again, these little details actually add up to essentially make this, again, this is a tragic failure, this attempted reconstruction, but the debunking of it, well, that's actually fails pretty badly as well. Now, I won't show the clips of a video. That tends to get my videos, whenever I do something like that, I get blocked in certain countries. But during the video, they also have in Egypt, so this is done in New England, where they're doing this, the nose replica. In Egypt themselves, they actually have a skilled sculptor who makes a smaller replica of the Sphinx, and he uses modern steel tools. Now, it's also be worth mentioning, if you watch it closely, you'll see that the chisels and the hammers they use are these toothed chisels, which again is an important feature. I'm going to do some more on this, because this a lot of these claw marks, that's one particular person reports, and it actually shows the tool themselves that they're doing. Now, there are for instance, the reconstruction, the restoration of the Parthenon in Greece. An actual expert, actual person who spends time doing it, can identify individual stone cutters, stone carvers, by the method of their, because each person has, it's almost like a signature. They have a different pattern the way they work, and they can identify different people working. It's not, it's again, but I won't go into that. But now back to this one. So it might be bad timing on the portions of a video where you see them working this, alleged ancient tool expert. I'm a little bit dubious, because, well, this actual sculptor who knows how he's doing, he's got a long-handled hammer, and he uses and adds, and he uses it as you should do, with your hands split apart. It may be just unfortunate timing, but most of the clips I saw where they were using this reconstruction Egyptian hammer, he's got his hands together midway along the long-handled hammer. This is not the signature of someone who's skilled with tools. This is, first day apprentice would have basically have his, ears clipped for using a tool like this. But that just might be bad timing of the editors. Maybe the guy had, he's had blisters or something, But again, this is an example of, well, this is not actually very good, tool usage. It's actually pretty terrible. If that's all the clips I saw, it's pretty much a lot of the tools were used, again, amateurishly, for, first day apprentice type of usage of some of the tools in there. The expert sculptor, he works with steel, and he even shows, even with a steel adze, working with his harder quality limestone is a slow, difficult process. It requires patience and skill. This is no secret. This is at the heart of masonry, stone masonry. It is not done overnight. It is a slow, patient process requiring skill. Experienced masons can hear they can hear cracks in the stone. It's almost like there's almost a ESP when it comes to experienced masons, how they know how to read the stone, even using the grains of the grain, like a expert carpenter utilizes the grain and uses it well. The same thing can apply to stone and to experienced stonemasons, stone workers as well. It took, so this experiment had a 2 week timeline. They did this in 2 weeks, and they used modern power tools to set up, but also, well, again, it's really a lot of well, pretty big mistakes, and again, a really poor reconstruction in the end. So, in 2 weeks to carve the nose, well, the Parthenon, famous, each piece of a Parthenon is, uh, it's no straight lines. Each piece, it's not just modular blocks. Every piece is curved and fitted individually. Amazing, amazing structure, really pushing, understanding of what we have now. The slight gentle curve in the columns themselves would take you would need to draw a circle with a mile radius to do that. Now, some of these, or most of these techniques have been actually unlocked, but it took 15 years to build the Parthenon, and that's one of the extraordinary things of it, that it was completed so quickly. It only took 15 years. Other temples, such as Baalbek, took over a century. The great cathedrals took over a century. These great stoneworks take a long time. A stone working is a long, patient skill. It doesn't happen overnight, and it certainly is not achieved in 2 weeks. Ancient peoples were obviously working on a different timeline. They didn't have the economic constraints we do now. To build a skyscraper, for instance, we need to get it up very quickly. This was not the mentality of the time. These buildings were not the functional profit-bearing buildings we have now. It's a different scale, and working on a modern conception of modern copper, but also modern timescales, is a fundamental flaw in this, and it's, well, pretty tragic. And I'm pretty sure that whether the Greeks or the Egyptians or the people of South America didn't have a TV production line and weren't finished, weren't in a rush to finish to get the documentary published. There was even like a tragic attempt to reconstruct the pyramid, just a small portion of it. It actually failed miserably. They even needed construction tools, but they themselves only had 1 week to do this. So this is not at all reasonable. This is not a You can't, this is not even apples and oranges, because they're both fruits. This is comparing um, two diametrically opposed things. It's, to use these as an examples is just, well, way off the mark. It's so, neither, they say Rome wasn't built in a day, neither was the Great Pyramid or was the Sphinx. And to say, to do a reconstruction within a few weeks or even a few months, it's really off the mark. And so these made-for-TV reconstructions are, actually very bad on all levels, and especially for the establishment mainstream who use these. And basically, they're making a profit out of this. This is a profit-driven industry. It's not in any way comparable or reasonable to use this as an example of what can and cannot be done. In the critiques of this video, that these copper chisels would bend relatively quickly. Well, firstly, this is a long, skinny, tapered chisel. Now, even a steel chisel of this shape will bend, and so it doesn't really, it's a really bad choice of chisel. These are arsenical copper chisels, not pure copper. This is pure copper. These are actual ancient Egyptian chisels. They're of arsenical copper, and they don't, they have a more appropriate shape. So you would be, you should be using this shape. This is even just in a logical sense, like, even steel, this is just bad form. In Hawaii, the Ravan, I forget the exact pronunciation of it. It's the only granite Hindu temple in America, and it's made using traditional techniques. They even drill stone. They drill through granite as well, and they use traditional techniques. So again, something worth looking into. But it's traditional techniques. Now, what is the carvers using? Now, I'll put a link to their channel, because they show the workers doing this, and you can watch in detail not only how do they carve, but also how they maintain and use their chisels. They use stubby little chisels because even a steel chisel will bend, as opposed to that long, skinny, tapered one. And another point is, but we'll notice as well, I'll show this in a second, he has all these chisels waiting to go. So as soon as this one gets blunt, he just grabs another one. He doesn't run off to the forge and do it again. this is a big issue in regards to this, again, this reconstruction, which they had 2 weeks, and they completely misused their time. It's actually, it's farcical, to be honest. And it's just, yeah, it's pure copper, wrong shaped chisels, doesn't match the ones that they could have used. The temple carvers here used over 70 different types and styles of chisel, because you'll use a certain one for a certain thing, and they've clearly used, this is just bad form. They had a forge, and so these was free workers working on this, and every time their chisel got blunt, they would have to run off to the forge and reshape their chisel. So they would stop working and they would run off to do it. That's bad. That's bad form. You'd have people doing that the stone carver never stops working. Someone else maintains his chisel, and he's always got a new one ready to go. So again, this is actually a really bad failure on Mark Lehner's side, but also the lack to pick some of these things up. It also shows that the debunkers, again, noobs. This is, it's quite laughable, really, how the use of this forge, and that they would stop working, they would repair their own chisels. Just bad form. The nose was eventually finished after 2 weeks. The percentage of time of effort that went into modern tools versus ancient ones, I don't know. That shouldn't have been done to be an authentic reconstruction, first off. But what it proves is that these TV reconstructions with this small time scale to finish the job, why didn't they just keep working with tools and see how far they could get with 2 weeks? They needed to finish it for the TV. This proves it doesn't prove anything at all, except for the part that these TV reconstructions are not authentic, and that there's a profit margin actually driven behind these. It's not really, not fair. So, though, to be said, even the bad choice of chisels and these pure copper chisels can cut this hard stone. It takes a long time, but so do steel chisels. Or steel tools. That's just the way working with stone is. So using short time spans, using the wrong material, choosing obviously really bad chisel to use, a long-handed chisel. Even steel bends, even woodworking chisels, if you use them wrong, steel chisels in wood, if you use them wrong, they bend. That's just, you're abusing your tools, really. And again, this is apparently was an ancient tool expert. Well, maybe in some aspects, but a tool usage expert, I wouldn't call him that. That would be a stretch. So if your sole aim is to discredit Mark Lehner and the opposition rather than a pursuit of knowledge, well, I would, these debunking ones are actually sort of debunk themselves, because there's missing so much important information. If you want to debunk him, and that's your objective, point out that pure copper was used instead of arsenical copper like the Egyptians used. Surely an Egyptologist making a reconstruction would have specified this. Point out the amateurish work practices. The guy carving was also the guy repairing his chisel, and he only had one at a time. So again, this is not realistic. They used the wrong tools and this ridiculously short time scale to fit it in for a TV production. You want to debunk? That's how you do it. It's like, this is really, really bad. But pure copper can cut hard stone. So it does. You can watch the whole. I'll put the link in the whole documentary. It can cut stone. It's just, like even with steel, it's a hard job. It takes time. So the deserved critiques of this experiment reconstruction, well, they're far more partisan than art analytical. It's an us versus them thing. It's not really a detailed look at it. No one comes out looking really good. Neither the critics, who fail to point out these important parts. Nova, who usually does great documentaries, they come out looking pretty bad. But Mark Lehner's the ultimate loser, really, in this. Steel, working with copper or working with stone, whether it's with pure copper, arsenical copper, or steel, takes time. It's not an easy job to do. The devil is in the details with these things, and anyone who disagrees with me is a paid shill. So because I point this out, apparently I'm a shill for the establishment. I would say, well, I think you're a shill for the other one. But anyway, have a good one.